Rene Angelil discovered Celine Dion when she was 12 years old, turned her into the best-selling recording artist Canada has ever produced, and, according to a bombshell memoir published just months ago, may have controlled nearly every aspect of her life along the way. This is the story of a woman who would later fight stiff person syndrome, stand on the Eiffel Tower at the Paris 2024 Olympics, and come back from everything, including possibly him. This video covers the entire story. The love, the power, the death, the book that blew it all open, the Vito Luprano memoir published in January 2026, why the so-called Peabo Bryson betrayal rumor is completely fabricated, and what Celine's life actually looks like 10 years after the man who built her empire was gone. Before we get anywhere near the origin story, I need to address Peabo Bryson directly, because this is genuinely timely. Peabo Bryson died on June 2, 2026, just days before I filmed this video, after suffering a stroke. His family released a statement saying he transitioned peacefully at 5 o'clock in the evening, surrounded by his loved ones. He was 75 years old. When Celine heard the news, she posted a tribute on Instagram that I honestly was not prepared for. She wrote, "I'm heartbroken to hear that we lost Peabo Bryson today. His incredible voice and his kind spirit embodied the beauty of song and performance. He was so wonderful and generous to me all those years ago, when we recorded Beauty and the Beast. He made me so comfortable, as I was just learning to sing in English. He will remain for me always as a real symbol of the joy that music has brought to my life." I kept reading that tribute looking for something cold, something distant, anything at all that might support the idea that something had gone wrong between them. There is nothing like that there. What I found instead was specific, warm grief from a woman honoring a man who helped her when she was young, and still finding her footing in a language that wasn't her own. I want you to hold on to that, because it matters for everything that follows. So let's deal with the rumor directly and get it out of the way. The claim that Celine Dion or Rene Angelil made some kind of promise to Peabo Bryson that was later broken, that there was a falling out, a betrayal, an episode of bad faith, has no sourcing behind it. It does not appear in reputable journalism. It is not in any court filing. It is not in the Vito Luprano memoir, which, as you are about to see, did not hold anything back when there was something worth saying. It appears to be an internet rumor sitting on a foundation of absolutely nothing. And the actual documented relationship between Celine Dion and Peabo Bryson looks like the opposite of that story. Here is what is verified. In 1991, Disney was producing an animated film called Beauty and the Beast and needed a pop version of the title song, written by Alan Menken and Howard Ashman for the film's soundtrack. They paired Celine with Peabo Bryson, a veteran R&B singer from Greenville, South Carolina, who was already well established in American music. And the reason they made that pairing is the detail I want you to sit with. Disney was not confident that Celine could carry the song alone. She was already a star in Canada and parts of Europe, but she was still largely unknown to American audiences. She was still learning to sing in English. That fact has always struck me. Celine Dion, the woman who would go on to sell over 200 million records worldwide, was treated by Disney as someone who might need a more established partner just to get a fair hearing in the United States. Her American success was never inevitable. It was built carefully and deliberately over years, and that specific collaboration is where it started to take shape. The song was released in November of 1991. It reached number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100, won the Academy Award for Best Original Song at the March 1992 ceremony, won the Golden Globe for Best Original Song, and then took home the Grammy for Best Pop Performance by a Duo or Group with Vocals at the February 1993 ceremony, which was Celine's first Grammy win. It was nominated for Record of the Year and Song of the Year as well, losing both to Eric Clapton's Tears in Heaven, and here is a piece of trivia that real fans genuinely enjoy. The Juno Award it won for Single of the Year actually beat out another Celine Dion song, If You Asked Me To, in the same category. She lost to herself that year. What the record shows is 35 years of warm public rapport between Celine and Peabo Bryson, ending with a tribute in June of 2026, in which she called him wonderful and generous. That is not what a betrayal looks like. That is what loss looks like. Now that we have that settled, Let's go back to where everything actually began. Celine Marie Claudette Dion was born on March 30, 1968, in Charlemagne, Quebec. As the youngest of 14 children, born to Thérèse Tanguay and Adhémar Dion. When she was 12 years old, she co-wrote a song called Ce n'était qu'un rêve, French for It Was Only a Dream, with her mother and her brother Jacques. Her brother Michel put the demo tape in an envelope and mailed it to the most successful music manager he could identify in Quebec. He found the name on the back of a Jeanette Renaud album, Rene Angelil. Rene Angelil was born on January 16, 1942 in Montreal, to a father of Syrian descent and a mother of Lebanese origin. He had been a pop singer himself in the 1960s as part of a group called Les Baronets, Quebec's answer to the British invasion, and arguably the most successful francophone pop group of that era. Think of them as Quebec's closest cultural equivalent to the Beatles in terms of the moment, if not the legacy, and had transitioned into management, working with Jeanette Renaud and with a young artist named René Simard. When he received that envelope from the Dion family, he had a reputation, a track record, and by most accounts an extraordinarily sharp instinct for talent. He listened to the tape, and he cried. He invited 12-year-old Celine and her mother to his office. He handed her a pencil, told her to hold it like a microphone, and asked her to sing as if she were standing in front of a sold-out arena. She sang, and Rene Angelil made the decision that would define the rest of his life. He believed in her completely. He was 38 years old. She was 12. Now here is the detail that every story about Rene and Celine eventually has to confront. In 1981, Rene Angelil mortgaged his house to finance Celine's first album, La Voix du Bon Dieu. She was 13 years old. The album reached #1 in Quebec. The gamble paid off, and Rene Angelil, it turns out, never really stopped gambling, on her, on himself, and eventually, very literally, at poker tables around the world. But we will get to that. The 26-year age gap between them has always been part of this story, and it deserves to be named clearly. They met when she was 12 and he was 38. She has said publicly that she fell in love with him as a teenager. Her mother, Thérèse, opposed the relationship initially. The gap was significant, and Rene had already been married twice before. These are not small facts. They are also not the whole story. The romance is understood to have begun in any real sense around 1988, when Celine was 19 or 20 years old. That year she represented Switzerland at the Eurovision Song Contest, singing Ne partez pas sans moi, and she won by a single point, one of the closest finishes the competition had ever seen. And by the accounts that exist, that night, the night she became a Eurovision champion, was also the night of their first real date. She was 20, he was 46. She kept the relationship private for years. In 1993, she made it public through the dedication in her album The Color of My Love. And on December 17, 1994, they married at Notre Dame Basilica in Montreal. The ceremony broadcast live on Canadian television, attended by around 500 guests. The wedding dress became legendary. The tiara became a medical event. The headpiece reportedly weighed close to 7 pounds and was decorated with thousands of Swarovski crystals. Sources range from 2,000 to 20,000 depending on who you ask. So pick your favorite number, the spirit is the same. What is not in dispute is what Celine told Vogue in 2024. When they finally removed the tiara, it had cut into her scalp from the pressure. She needed to be on antibiotics for 3 weeks after her own wedding ceremony. She wore a 7-pound crystal headpiece that required medical treatment afterward, and she has described that day as one of the greatest of her life. Make of that what you will. What Rene and Celine built together over the following decade was not just a music career, it was an industrial empire. She became the best-selling Canadian recording artist of all time, with over 200 million records sold worldwide. Her 1995 French album Deux, produced by Jean-Jacques Goldman, became the best-selling French-language album ever made, with approximately 10 million copies sold. She is the best-selling French-language recording artist in history. And then in 1996 came Falling Into You, the album that would cement her global crossover and set the stage for what was about to happen next. And then there is My Heart Will Go On. When James Cameron's Titanic arrived in 1997, it brought the song that would follow Celine everywhere for the rest of her career. It won the Academy Award for Best Original Song. It took home Grammys for Record of the Year and Best Female Pop Vocal Performance. It stands among the best-selling physical singles by a female artist in history, with approximately 18 million copies sold. In April of 2025, it was added to the Library of Congress National Recording Registry, selected as one of 25 recordings of cultural and historical significance that year. Here is the detail I genuinely cannot stop thinking about whenever I hear that song. Celine Dion initially hated it. She has said publicly that she wanted to choke her husband over it, because she did not want to record it. Rene pushed her to do it anyway. She cut the demo in one take, essentially to move on and prove a point, and that single take became one of the most iconic vocal recordings of the 20th century. The man who, according to later accounts, controlled everything, was on this occasion genuinely categorically right. Rene co-conceived what became the most lucrative residency model in the history of Las Vegas. A New Day, which ran at Caesar's Palace from 2003 to 2007 and was directed by Franco Dragone, grossed $385 million, the highest-grossing Las Vegas residency of all time. A second residency, simply called Celine, ran from 2011 to 2019 and grossed approximately $296 million. Combined, $681 million across more than 1,100 shows and over 4.5 million tickets. Career-wide, Celine Dion is one of only 8 recording artists in history to have crossed $1 billion in total touring gross. Rene was also, separately, a serious poker player who co-owned Montreal's iconic Schwartz's Deli beginning in 2012. He was a man who bet on things, on artists, on venues, on cards, on himself. And over decades, he had an extraordinary record. But now we need to talk about what was happening behind the scenes. Because there is a memoir, published just months ago, that says the empire had some very uncomfortable architecture underneath it. On January 12, 2026, 10 years to the month after Rene Angelil's death, a book was published that rattled the Celine Dion fan community and the Canadian music industry in ways that are still being processed. The full title is, It's All Coming Back to Me, From My Humble Beginnings to the Real Story Behind Celine Dion's Music Career. The author is Vito Luprano. Luprano is not a bitter nobody with a self-publishing account and a grudge. He was born in Bari, Italy, and built a career as a senior executive at Sony Music Canada, where he served as executive producer on 21 of Celine's albums over roughly 25 years, beginning in 1986. That includes most of her biggest records, among them Do, Falling Into You, and Let's Talk About Love, the album that produced My Heart Will Go On. The book hit #1 on Amazon in the Biographies of Pop Musicians category almost immediately after release. The first remarkable thing about this memoir is not what is inside it. It is the conditions under which it was published. According to Luprano, Rene Angelil himself set 2 terms for the book's release. It could only come out after Rene's death, and Celine had to read the manuscript before it went to print. Luprano says he honored both conditions. Reporting in La Presse confirmed that Celine's lawyers reviewed the manuscript and asked for some modifications, which Luprano agreed to make. This is not a rogue operation. It is a book that Rene apparently sanctioned posthumously, that Celine's own legal team was given the opportunity to shape, and that still came out saying what it says. When I first heard about this memoir, my honest gut reaction was, another disgruntled music executive settling scores on his way out the door. But then I actually read the quotes, and then I read them again, and I kept returning to the same problem. This man was in the room for 25 years. He was executive producer on 21 of her albums. If you want to dismiss him as just a bitter former employee, you have to explain away 2 decades of documented access and professional intimacy. That is harder than it sounds. That is the tension this book sits in. According to Luprano, and I want to be precise here because everything I am about to describe comes from his account in the memoir, not from independently established fact, Rene Angelil was a visionary but also, in Luprano's words, controlling, impulsive, and manipulative. Luprano alleges that Rene took credit for Luprano's professional contributions, sometimes openly and sometimes behind his back. He alleges that his working relationship with Rene ended abruptly in 2010, without warning or real closure. I needed closure, Luprano has said, but Rene never gave it to me. The most widely quoted passage from the memoir is this one. In all these years, believe it or not, Celine had never once asked to share a meal or a coffee with me. He describes a dynamic in which Celine was, in his account, essentially off-limits to colleagues unless Rene was present. He writes, "We all knew that unless Rene was present, Celine was off-limits." Sit with that for a moment. This man worked alongside her for 25 years and made 21 of her albums. And in that entire time, she apparently never once asked him to have a meal or a cup of coffee. That is either a completely ordinary professional boundary or it is one of the loneliest sentences ever written about somebody's working life. I genuinely cannot decide which. But the anecdote in the memoir that I think deserves the most careful attention is the one about All by Myself. Luprano alleges that Rene was notably absent on the day that recording session took place, unusual for him, and that Celine arrived looking, in Luprano's description, vulnerable and heavy with sadness. Luprano alleges that Rene had deliberately arranged a marital argument before the session to put Celine in an emotionally raw state, to manufacture the emotional vulnerability the recording would need. When Luprano reportedly raised it with Rene after the session, Rene allegedly did not deny it. If that account is accurate, then one of the most celebrated emotional vocal performances in pop music history was engineered through deliberate psychological manipulation by the artist's husband. That is the allegation on the table. I am going to leave space for your reaction in the comments, because I have been going back and forth on how to process it since I first read it. Luprano also reaches back further in the memoir to explain where he believes Rene's controlling tendencies originated. He describes Rene's professional history with Jeanette Renaud, the Quebecois artist Rene had managed before Celine, who eventually left him after falling in love with someone who then took over her career management. Rene allegedly never recovered from it. According to Luprano, Rene once said to him directly, "But now I have Celine." And in French reporting of the memoir's contents, there is a further alleged line from Rene. "It's better for everyone that she doesn't fall in love with anyone but me." Luprano writes that he understood that statement not as a romantic declaration, but as a declaration of control. Celine was his second chance, Luprano writes, and he wasn't going to blow it. There is also the Lara Fabian angle, which became its own separate controversy. For anyone who needs the context, Lara Fabian is a Belgian-Italian singer who represented Luxembourg at the 1988 Eurovision, the same year Celine won for Switzerland, and placed fourth. According to the memoir, years later, around 1997, Celine allegedly threatened to leave Sony Music entirely if the label signed Fabian for the American market. Luprano claims Celine said on a conference call, "If that happens, I'll no longer record for Sony." He also alleges that Celine considered Fabian to have been unkind to her at Eurovision. Lara Fabian has responded publicly, and her response is direct. She told the journal de Montréal, "Talk of a so-called rivalry has never concerned me, and I'm certain it didn't concern Celine either. When I think of Celine Dion, it is purely a deep feeling of admiration that fills me, for the woman, the artist, and her journey." Fabian's former producer Rick Allison went further on Facebook and called the episode completely false, noting that Fabian did in fact sign with Sony's Columbia label and achieved American success. Her 1999 single I Will Love Again reached #1 on the Billboard Dance Club Songs chart. The idea that Celine successfully blocked Fabian from the American market does not hold up against the actual factual record. And then there is the Phil Spector episode, which has been separately corroborated and reported by CTV, among others. Around 1995, during sessions for the album Falling Into You, the record that would go on to win the Grammy for Album of the Year, Phil Spector, legendary producer and eventual convicted murderer, was briefly involved in Celine's recording sessions. By multiple accounts, Spector behaved erratically. He allegedly produced a firearm during a session and made a statement comparing himself to what he had done to Ike and Tina Turner, implying he could split Celine and Rene the same way. Rene ended the collaboration on the spot. Spector was later convicted of second-degree murder in the 2003 shooting death of Lana Clarkson. It is a brief chapter in the Rene Angelil story, but it is the kind of detail that reminds you how genuinely dangerous the music industry could be in that era, and how decisive Rene was when he needed to be. Rene Angelil was first diagnosed with throat cancer in 1999. Before he began radiation treatment, the couple pursued IVF, partly because treatment could affect fertility, and their son Rene Angelil was born on January 25, 2001, in Las Vegas. Rene underwent 38 rounds of chemotherapy and radiation and was eventually declared cancer-free. Years later, the couple attempted 6 rounds of IVF to have more children. During that process, Celine was initially carrying triplets. One of the fetuses did not survive early in the pregnancy. She said publicly, "He chose to let go to give space to his brothers to grow." The twins, Nelson and Eddie, were born on October 23, 2010, at St. Mary's Medical Center in West Palm Beach, Florida, at 11:11 and 11:12 in the morning. Celine was 42 years old. Eddie was named after French songwriter Eddie Marnet, who had produced Celine's first 5 albums. Nelson was named after Nelson Mandela. The cancer returned. Rene had surgery in December of 2013 and stepped back from managing Celine's career in June of 2014. By September of 2015, she had publicly stated that he had months to live. He died on January 14, 2016 at their home in Henderson, Nevada, 2 days before what would have been his 74th birthday. His funeral was held on January 22, 2016 at Notre Dame Basilica in Montreal, the same church where they had married 21 years earlier, attended by approximately 1,500 people and broadcast on television. He is buried at Notre Dame des Neiges Cemetery. In 2021, an asteroid was named in his honor, asteroid 241,364 Rene Angelil. Before he died, Rene had reportedly told Celine that his one wish was to die in her arms. She told USA Today that she had agreed to it. "Okay, fine, I'll be there. You'll die in my arms." But in an interview with ABC News after his death, Celine offered a correction that I find quietly devastating. "He did not die in my arms, but I think he died in my heart." The distinction between what was promised and what was real is something I keep coming back to when I think about their entire story. He wanted to die in her arms. She was there, in their home in Henderson, Nevada, and yet it didn't go that way, and her way of framing it, "He died in my heart," is either the most beautiful sentence a widow has ever spoken, or it is the sound of someone making peace with an ending that didn't go quite as planned. Maybe those two things are exactly the same. There is one more detail about Rene's final months that I think belongs in this story, and it is the one I personally find most humanizing. During the Las Vegas residency, Rene had always stood at the side of the stage. Before every single show, Celine would hold his hand for good luck. When his illness advanced to the point where he could no longer be there in person, Celine had a gold cast made of his hand. She kept it backstage. It was displayed at his memorial. She held a replica of his hand until she could no longer hold the real one. After Rene's death, Celine returned to work. She released the French album Encore un soir in August of 2016, and Pink wrote a song specifically for her for that record, called Recovering, about grief. She kept performing, and then her body began to fail her in a way that had actually been building for much longer than anyone knew. In December of 2022, Celine posted a video on Instagram revealing that she had been diagnosed with stiff person syndrome, a rare autoimmune neurological disorder with an estimated prevalence of 1 to 2 cases per million people, affecting women up to 3 times as frequently as men. The disease causes severe muscle rigidity and spasms so powerful that, in Celine's case, one spasm reportedly broke a rib. There is no cure. She has said the first symptoms appeared as early as 2008, during her Taking Chances World Tour, years before anyone had a name for what was happening to her body. She canceled touring dates through 2024. Her documentary, I Am Celine Dion, premiered on Prime Video on June 25, 2024, and includes a raw, unguarded sequence of her experiencing a medical episode, spasms, a physical crisis, that she chose not to cut from the film. She wanted people to understand what she was actually living through. Her disclosure drove a significant surge in public awareness of stiff person syndrome that some researchers and advocates began referring to as the Celine effect. And then, on July 26, 2024, at the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympics, Celine Dion appeared on the balcony of the Eiffel Tower and sang Edith Piaf's Hymne à l'amour. It was her first live performance since the diagnosis. It was the first time most of the world had seen her perform in years. It was by near universal consensus one of the most electrifying moments in the history of Olympic opening ceremonies. On January 14, 2026, the 10th anniversary of Rene's death, she posted a tribute on Instagram alongside a photograph of his portrait on a piano. She wrote, "Mon amour, 10 years without you feels like just a day, and yet each day feels like a decade. 10 years without your caress, and yet every day I feel your touch. We miss you more than we can bear, but you taught us to be strong. We love you more, every day and every year." Celine, R.C. Nelson and Eddie, on March 30, 2026, her 58th birthday. She announced a residency at Paris La Défense Arena, Europe's largest indoor arena, beginning September 12, 2026. She made the announcement in a video filmed beneath the Eiffel Tower, saying, "I'm doing great, managing my health, feeling good. I'm singing again, even doing a little dancing." More than 9 million fans reportedly entered the pre-sale lottery. All shows sold out within hours. What began as 10 dates expanded to 16, and a further run of dates was added for May of 2027. On April 17, 2026, she released her first new single in 7 years, Danson, written by Jean-Jacques Goldman with Luc Leroy and Yann Massé, and recorded in September of 2025. Goldman described the song as being about dancing above the abyss. Given what Celine has been through, the illness, the grief, the 10 years of rebuilding, that description does not feel like a metaphor. It feels like a mission statement. Here is my actual hot take, and I am not going to soften it. The most remarkable thing about Celine Dion is not the voice, not the record sales, and not even the comeback. Though all three of those things are genuinely extraordinary. It is that after a marriage that a 25-year insider now publicly describes as controlling and isolating, after a disease that nearly took her career, after losing the man who ran everything, she is the one still standing, and she does not appear broken. She is releasing music, she is selling out European arenas, she is posting warm, specific tributes to the people she loved. She appears, against all reasonable probability, to be exactly who she was always working to become. Was Rene Angelil a controlling man? Vito Luprano says yes, and he spent 25 years in the room, which gives his account real weight. But it is still one man's account, still an allegation, still something Rene is no longer alive to answer. Celine has never publicly disputed the portrait, but she has never endorsed it either. Her lawyers reviewed the manuscript. Her tribute posts are consistent, specific, and warm. You can look at a woman who remains publicly devoted to the memory of a man her former colleague describes as manipulative, and you can read that in at least 2 completely different directions, as devotion or as something more complicated than devotion, and I genuinely cannot tell you with certainty which interpretation is correct. I am not sure anyone can. What I do know is this: Celine Dion was 12 years old when Rene Angelil heard her voice and mortgaged his house and decided she would be the greatest thing he ever built. She was 56 when she stood on the Eiffel Tower, fighting a disease that should have ended her career, and sang for the world. Whatever happened in the middle, the control, the love, the isolation, the gold cast of a hand, the tiara that required antibiotics, she is still here. She is dancing above the abyss. And she sounds like nobody else who has ever lived. If you had a reaction to the Luprano memoir, I want to hear it. If you have a theory about the Lara Fabian situation, let me have it. And if you think my hot take is wrong, if you think Rene Angelil was nothing but a visionary who deserves better than one former colleague's account, make that case in the comments. That is what they are for.